author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Kamala makes a play for Republican voters, and New York just got a little more liberal with its gun laws. All this and more on today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. As Kamala Harris continues her outreach into wider communes, what does it mean for her campaign? Can she stand the heat in the campaign kitchen? Well, we're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner, to help us figure that out. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Mark. I grew up in a middle-class background. I'm
so glad you mentioned that, Tim, because I think it's worth pointing out that I grew up in a middle-class background. And let's jump into what it obviously that is the chief obfuscation of the Kamala Harris campaign response at present. But let's talk specifically about her recent interview on Fox News with Bret Baier. What was your take on that?
Well, it was clear from the beginning that her strategy was going to be obfuscation and to talk over him and force him to talk over her. So I don't think much was accomplished, except for the fact that I think the left will be pleased with the fact that Harris was willing to go into the lion's den of Fox News and stand up, so to speak, to the questioning. The problem was she had nothing to say about herself. She turned every single question into an attack on Trump. And Trump is, if nothing else, the most well-known, well-defined political figure in modern American history. Everybody knows what he's about and what he isn't about. I think these attacks would be more effective if Trump hadn't already been president for 4 years and she hadn't already been vice president for the last 3+ years. So it's still going to come down to the record and whether people want a change, because it was interesting in a Fox News poll that was done a couple of months ago, maybe 6 weeks. It was clear that voters in general, favored major change as opposed to minor change, where not much change. And in that poll, Donald Trump was seen as the agent of change. So I don't think she did anything to pivot away from that. She didn't even talk about her opportunity economy and what that actually means. So it was a riverboat gamble. It was largely unwatchable because of the fact that they were talking over each other, which I suppose was maybe the best strategy because she had very little, if anything, new to offer. I think the one exception was she said, my presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. Now, what she really means by that is hard to tell, but it's certainly not going to put the Biden team, as opposed to the Harris team, to work on her behalf over these next weeks, because he has, she's basically said, look, I'm going to separate myself from him, without specifying how she would do it, except to say to the most difficult questions, I will follow the law. For example, on transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants.
Illegal immigrants in prison.
Even more so. Yes, that all the way down to the level of someone who entered the country illegally, then committed crimes that put them in prison. That's the extreme position that even they should get taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries. And I think she looked pretty bad with her answer by saying, I will follow the law. I mean, that can be an answer to almost any question.
Well, here's the thing, right? So the law of the land at the moment is that it states that it's the states, the individual states, that have the ability to set laws for abortion. And so she's going to follow the law on one thing, which is transgender reassignment for illegal immigrants in prison. But she's determined not to follow the law as it stands today on abortion by trying to re-implement the Roe v. Wade standard, as it were. So the idea that I will follow the law as a succinct or even solid answer is ridiculous, isn't it? Because there are certain elements where she wants to change the law. So it's not a question of I will follow the law. It's I will follow the laws that I want to follow and not follow the ones and try and change the ones that I don't want to follow. So the idea of following the law it's a real cop-out question, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and it makes you really wonder where she would be if she didn't have the abortion issue working in her favor. Because since the Dobbs decision, of course, the left has been extremely animated and exercised about a right that they consider fundamental that has been in place for 60 years. So it was, there's still fallout from that. But as I've often pointed out, presidential elections are more about people's personal economic situation, their financial situation, their sense of safety and security, while midterm elections, like in 2022, can be animated by a peripheral issue like abortion, which has turned from peripheral to significant, but it's far outweighed by people's concerns about the economy and about the border and about crime, the cost of living, the fundamentals of anybody's life.
It's actually, I think some people would argue that those things that you listed outside of abortion are all interconnected, because you've got cost of living, cost of housing. If there's more people in the country, the supply and demand. And of course, there are numerous illegal aliens who enter the country and then commit more crimes as well. And so all these things kind of tie together. But not abortion. That's the outlier on that particular platform.
It's the only real social issue or cultural issue that is having an impact on this election, an outsized impact. Abortion has never been a primary issue in a presidential race until this year, and one suspects it'll fade as the years go by and people get used to the idea that each state can set its own parameters. It's Kamala Harris that wants to have a national right to an abortion on demand all the way up to 9 months. Whereas Donald Trump isn't saying, let's ban abortion nationally. He's saying, let each state decide. And I think that's the pragmatic position. And I think it's the constitutionally correct position when each state gets to determine what its citizens want in terms of laws on reproductive rights, otherwise known as abortion. If you live in Vermont, and the citizens of that state believe that abortion should be available at any time, any place, for any reason, all the way up to the point of birth. Whereas if you live in Alabama, the citizens there might want far more restrictive abortion laws or even outlaw abortion. So, of course, what Kamala Harris has done is, and other Democrats, is to take individual instances where an abortion would have made the path easier for a woman or in fact saved her life, whatever. They pick and choose certain anecdotes about the horrors of not having a intrinsic right to abortion anywhere, anytime in the United States.
Yeah, it's. I suspect it's front and center of the campaigns because, as you point out, Kamala Harris presently doesn't have an edge on any of the key issues: the economy, the border, crime, taxes, inflation, things like this. She doesn't have an edge in that. So they're almost forced to run with the abortion card, as it were.
And the only other thing that they have a slight advantage on is a rather esoteric term, which is democracy. I mean, I don't know if the people who answer that question even know what the question really is. More specifically, are we going to continue to remain a democracy, or are we going to become an authoritarian state? So I'm not sure even that benefits her.
We'll see how that works out for her. And we're coming back with Tim Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm still your host, Mark Angelides, and we continue to be joined by long-time host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Now, earlier we were talking more specifically about Kamala Harris's recent Fox News interview, but now, Tim, I'd like to talk about the wider 2024 race and how that's playing out. And if I may just take a moment first to discuss something that we're doing together on the pages of libertynation.com, Electoral Countdown, is we've actually been parsing the swing state pollings down to the last 5 most recent polls and then figuring out what those show, which I believe, and I think you agree with me, Tim, that it shows the more current trend, because swing state polling tends to be a lot sparser than national polling. Yes. As what we found was quite stunning is that Trump is actually leading. If you just take the last 5 polls for each of the 7 swing states, Trump is leading at time of recording in all 7 swing states and has more than an average overall of +1 across all those 7 swing states. What's your take?
Well, it's not just that Trump has basically taken the lead in every single one of the 7 swing states. It's the trajectory as well. The trajectory is clearly upward for him, downward for Kamala Harris. And that was inevitable because she's been basically unable to define what her presidency would look like. There's still lingering questions of, okay, she's not Donald Trump, and now she says she's not Joe Biden, but what is she? And I don't
She's somebody raised in a middle-class household, Tim, with a lawn, apparently, that needed to be cut.
The lawn is very important, Mark.
All about the lawn.
And that is, as I said, this whole thing about the middle-class background. She says she uses slogans that are the kind that she thinks middle-class suburban dwellers want to hear. But it's very transparent with something like, in my neighborhood, people were proud of their lawns. I mean, I think anybody who is a suburban dweller listening to that would kind of cringe, like, that's what she thinks I want to hear. But it's just not enough. She doesn't have the political skill to create a vision of what her presidency would be. And the most important question, really, when it comes down to it, is, and I wrote a piece on Liberty Nation with the title, Can Kamala Harris Make Americans Forget the Last 4 Years? And so far, she hasn't been able to do that. And I suspect this trajectory for Trump will continue upward because now people are saying, okay, it was nice Kamala momentum and campaign of joy and all the vibes. But when it comes down to it, they have to ask themselves, do I want this woman to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States? And do I want her to become the leader of the free world? It just seems like too heavy a lift for too many voters. And the excellent piece that you've been doing each day on the election, updating the numbers, clearly show the trends that way. There's a couple other indicators. Minority voters have been a serious problem for Kamala Harris. She's bleeding Black and Hispanic voters at a rather rapid pace. and she cannot win with the level of support that the polls are showing among Black and Hispanic voters. Party registration is another key element of this. For the first time in a long time, Republicans have actually outdistanced the Democrats in party registration. And that is a key indicator of where an election is likely to land. And if you take the presidential preference polls, put them aside, and just look at which Gallup has done with an excellent survey that was very revealing. Of the 10 past indicators of somebody that's going to win an election or lose it, 8 of those 10 indicators favor Republicans and Trump, and 0 favor Kamala Harris and the Democrats. 2 are considered a tie or a wash. So I think if you look past the number crunching and you look at the indicators of what people care about, it's hard to conclude that Kamala Harris would win this election.
But there's one fact that I found absolutely fascinating, and that's the superb Real Clear Politics. They have their Electoral College projection map, and like every other place that has a projection map, they've got a certain amount of what they consider safe Electoral College votes for Donald Trump and a safe amount for Kamala Harris. And then you've got the 7 swing states in the middle that are classed as the toss-ups. But Real Clear Politics is a bit of an outlier for one particular reason. It classes Minnesota as a toss-up, which, now I know you're going to love the history I'm going to lay on you here, Tim, because you know all this inside out, but the last Republican to win Minnesota was Richard Nixon. And even Ronald Reagan in his 49-state landslide failed to win Minnesota because obviously Walter Mondale, hometown boy. So they decided to go for him.
And Mondale barely won that state.
Mm. But now an average of pollings for Minnesota puts Kamala about 4 and a bit points ahead. The margin of error average of those polls is about 3.5, which means that there's probably about a point and a half swing needed for even Minnesota to swing to Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that people have a tendency to view these swing states and quasi-swing states like Virginia and Minnesota in isolation. Mm. And in fact, I think they need to be looked at more in bulk because there's a certain zeitgeist that is present in the Rust Belt that isn't in the Sun Belt. And so if Trump is trending upwards in Pennsylvania, then he probably is in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota as well. And likewise, if Kamala Harris is trending down, it's likely to cost her in each of these states because they're all connected. They're all Americans. They have similar values, heartland values, as they call it.
Tim Donner, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm still your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us today Mr. John Parker of Sheepdog Impact Assistance, that's SDIA, who has been essentially jetting around the country to help people in need, from what I can tell. John, would you like to, first of all, thank you for coming on to talk with us today. And would you like to give us an overview of what Sheepdog Impact Assistance actually does?
Yes, so Sheepdog Impact Assistance is a national nonprofit, and we work with veterans and first responders from all over the country. And we have 3 programs that primarily we run. One is our outdoor adventure program, where we bring veterans and first responders to our ranch or to other areas of the country and take them on what we call an outdoor adventure. one of our slogans is get off the couch. And our outdoor adventure program is all about that. We're helping them get off the couch and experience some new things that might change the way they think or look at life at that moment. That could be up in Yellowstone. It could be in Mount Rushmore. We have a 60-acre ranch in Jane, Missouri, where we do a lot of our outdoor adventures as well. So we just recently did one in Hawaii, and we have one on the docket for next year in Hawaii. So we really try to get them in places that they probably wouldn't have gone or have never been, and introduce something new to them that will help them kind of change the trajectory of their life. The second program, which is one of our most important, is our mental wellness program, and that is called Warrior Path. And Warrior Path is a 90-day program where 7 of those days are spent on our ranch in Jane, Missouri, where we're talking about post-traumatic growth and living the best life that you can. It's not psychologists, there's no drugs, it's just peer-to-peer, warriors talking to warriors about how they can understand where their trauma came from and how they can turn those struggles into strength and live their best life. Again, that program is 90 days, and 7 of it is spent on the ranch. And then after you leave the ranch, we communicate via Zoom, we communicate via text messages, you've got homework assignments. It's really just kind of keeping track of what you've learned while you were on the ranch, and then kind of helping you along with your classmates to continue to do those practices that we give you. We call them practices because if we called them tools, that would mean we're telling you something is broken. And we don't believe anything is broken. We believe that these practices, meditation or reading or journaling or going for walks outside, these are all practices that can help you kind of take a step back from that moment of trauma or that moment of angst and really kind of refocus on your day. One of the things we teach in that program is there's 2 things that you can control every day, and that's attitude and effort. And if you do a good job of controlling those, then the rest of your day is going to be pretty fine, pretty easy. The last pillar or program that we have is the one that currently has kept us very busy at this moment, and that's our disaster response / continued service. We found that veterans and first responders, when they take off that uniform, a lot of times they feel lost and they feel like they can't give back to society the way they had before. I say a lot that we signed the dotted line when we joined, whether it's the police department or the fire department or any first responder or the military, and we said we would protect and serve. And for a lot of us, that means a lifetime. We don't just stop because the uniform came off. So our disaster response missions are geared towards that. We look for ways that we can go into a community after something terrible has happened and find a way to help. We don't want to get in the way, but we want to get in and do as much as we can. And the big thing at the end of the day is to provide them hope and give them a thought that, somebody cares and that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And we find ways to do that, whether it be clearing a driveway, pulling a tree off a roof, tarping a roof after it's got holes in it from wind damage, or sometimes it's just delivering food into areas that they can't get it. And then last but not least, sometimes it's just walking up and asking somebody how they're doing. And you'd be surprised at how important that is to that person, that somebody just showed that they cared and asked them how their day was. So it's big things, it's little things. Our CEO always says, if you feel like you're doing something small on one of our disaster response missions, trust me, you're doing something big. And those are the 3 pillars that we have in our organization, and all 3 are cost-free to the veterans and first responders. So when we take you on an outdoor adventure, it's paid for. When we put you through our Warrior Path, or when you sign up for our Warrior Path program, it's paid for. And when you go on a disaster response, we usually drive you there, and then everything is taken care of when we get you there. So there really is no excuse to not get off the couch and become a part of an organization like us or volunteer for an organization like us.
The second pillar about the warrior ethos, that pretty much pervades all of it, doesn't it?
It does.
It's the overarching idea that inside each of us there's a warrior, and inside first responders specifically and military specifically, these are people who've put that persona out at front, and because of that, they're the people who take the most damage within society, which is where your first pillar comes in. But then the pillar 3 which is the disaster relief efforts. That's actually that's a very reciprocal situation, isn't it?
Yeah, so for the last 3 weeks, we've been on the road, which is it's very unusual. We've never had a back-to-back-to-back scenario where we're, tasking our people and our volunteers. 2 weeks ago, it was Hurricane Helene, and we were in Florida. Then we came back to Arkansas to refuel for one day, load up again, grab the next group of volunteers, and head down to North Carolina to do a lot of flood recovery for them, and that was a lot of extensive work. And now, we're back here in Northwest Arkansas for 24 hours, and we're getting ready to head down to outside of Tampa for Hurricane Milton. And again, it's, we know there's a need. We know that people need us and need help. And it's very important to us. Helping is healing for us as well. So we try to find ways that we can give back to the communities, but we also know that we've got skills that some other organizations don't have. We have a lot of veterans and first responders that run towards danger.
There's a very American ethos that of rugged individualism, and when that coincides with like a brotherhood of like-minded people, it's one of the most powerful forces. And I think that's something that is really behind what a lot of people would bulk at saying, but American exceptionalism. It's the idea that the individual is an important enough factor that when they get together, it's almost an unstoppable force.
Yeah, it's always sad to see that a natural disaster is what brings us close and brings us tight again. We believe that America is strong. We believe that Americans are an unbelievably resilient group of people, and I've seen that over the last 3 weeks. As I've gone around the country and I've seen people in their worst moment, and yet they're asking me how I am. Or while we're cutting down trees, or we're moving water or tarping a roof, we have just people drive by and offer us water and drinks and food and hot food. So the resiliency of America, it's out there, and it's very, very strong. And like I said, it's unfortunate that it takes these kinds of events to bring us all together. But I will tell you that this country is extremely strong, and that people believe in each other. And you don't always see that until there's moments like this. But as I've gone around, it's given me renewed hope, because I truly believe that this country is amazing. And I'll tell you, in North Carolina, when we would go up in the mountains and we would go to some of these people's houses, I mean, there's a 78-year-old man who's walking 2 miles to go carry 6 bottles of water for him and his wife because they're trapped up there. And when we finally got to him and brought him some aid, he was all smiles. He wanted to show us a solar charger that he'd gotten from the Army guys down the road, and he wanted to show us that flower bed that he had protected by chainsawing down a big tree that laid on it because it was his wife's favorite thing. We also met a woman who was 85 years old that talked about how sitting by candlelight every night has brought the romance back into her marriage with her husband. And these are people who don't even realize that down the road, an entire community is gone. It was wiped out because of the floods. They haven't been able to go down and see it yet. So it's these people that find good in these moments of disaster. And again, like I say, one of the things that we bring is hope. Hope is free. And if you're willing to talk to someone and listen, you can provide that hope for them. And for us as first responders and veterans, I mean, we defended this country, and we've got a brotherhood, and it's very tight, and you see it on display during these type of events.
So what's the future for Sheepdog Impact Assistance?
Yeah, every year we're getting bigger and bigger, and that's what's exciting about our organization. And this year we actually hit a milestone, which was we've helped veterans and first responders in every single state. And that was huge for us. Now it's really, we have a motto: we're good, but we want to be great. Mm-hmm. And so we look for ways to do that. We're always looking for donors and sponsors that want to help us ramp up our outdoor adventure program and that want to be a part of our mental wellness program. Our disaster response, again, we've never seen anything like what we're seeing right now. But I can tell you, every time we put the call out for volunteers, it blows our mind how many people are like, hey, I'm going to take my vacation days and go and help somebody else like this. So for us, it's really just we're trying to find the right people that want to be involved in the program and be involved in this organization and help us go from good to great, because our mission is simple. We want to help veterans and first responders continue to get off the couch and lead their best life. And we know we can do that because we've seen the other side of it. We've seen the statistics. We know that what we teach works. One of the big things we teach is post-traumatic growth. Again, we don't want to use the word broken. We have warriors that are in our organization, people that have done things and see things that not a lot of people, on this earth have seen. But they're great human beings. They're leaders. They inspire others. So we like to just do whatever we can to help remind them that person's inside there. And what ways can we do or can we help you find that's going to bring out that person again? So the organization's getting bigger, and we're looking for, donors and sponsors that want to help us take those 3 pillars to the next level. But we're also looking for that veteran and first responder that wants to be a part of something big and not only help them, but help inspire others as we go.
John, can you tell people where they can get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so you can always go to our website, which is sheepdogia.org, or you can follow us on Facebook, which is Sheepdog Impact Assistance. Instagram, it's sheepdogia. Those are our 3 main places, but we're very responsive. So when people hit us up on any of those channels, we love to get back to them again, because it's about bringing in more people into the organization and just kind of giving them a chance to inspire others.
We're talking with John Parker of Sheepdog Impact Assistance. John, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza, to talk about the pushback to the Bruen decision that is taking place in New York right now. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
So, Scott, the Bruen decision from the Supreme Court essentially ruled that everything must be examined through the lens of Bruen in terms of what gun restrictions may be applied across the country. But now it seems that New York has decided to try and, well, previously it seems that New York had tried to buck that, but that a recent decision has had some clawback. What's the situation?
Well, I don't know that I would put it exactly how you did. And so let me just walk back just for a skosh, that they said that everything would have to be judged through the lens of Bruen. What they said in Bruen was that everything had to be judged through the lens of historical context. And so what might have been legal or was legal at the time the Second Amendment was adopted is something that could be, prohibited, actually. I should have stated it in the negative, which is what the Supreme Court would have said. So what might have been prohibited at the time of the adoption of the Second Amendment might also be prohibited today if there's historical, relevance or resonance to it. And that's what the court said here. Judge Sinatra, a federal judge in the Western District of New York, heard this case. And in 2022, the man's name is Mr. Christian, I believe, sued to have the new New York law stopped, and he was successful in getting an injunction against it for the meantime. So they passed a law. Kathy Hochul and the notoriously anti-gun New York State Assembly passed this bill that said, if you have a license to carry a firearm in New York, or you're legally allowed to carry a firearm in New York, you are not allowed to do so on private property unless you know for sure that private property owner welcomes your carry on that property. And, I just thought about it in the free speech context, Mark. You can imagine them saying in New York, you're allowed to have a MAGA hat and you're allowed to wear your MAGA hat in public, but you're not allowed to wear that MAGA hat into a business unless you know for sure through prominent signage posting that MAGA hats are welcome there. It's kind of preposterous, right, if you put it into another context. Well, that's what they did for guns. This was just a reeling measure. When the Supreme Court, it seemed, was forcing them to honor the Second Amendment rights of the citizens of New York, which is something that they've been notoriously hostile to. And they tried not to do it by saying, we'll just make it impossible. Mr. Christian, he wanted to go carry his firearm, for instance, when he got gas, on the way from point A to point B. This law would prohibit him from doing that, for instance, from weekly trips to the gas station, and said that it made the exercise of his right basically impossible. Well, Judge Sinatra of the Western District agreed when he granted the preliminary injunction, and now we have the ruling in chief, and the ruling says that doesn't pass constitutional muster. So that's the current ruling. New York State may not enforce this law. I'll hasten to add, before you get into any questions, that we should expect to see the hostile to gun rights authorities challenge this, which the next step would be the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And then we presume that whoever loses at the Second Circuit would appeal again then, and that would be to the United States Supreme Court.
So as of now, the right to carry a firearm in New York is, they don't need to look for a specific piece of signage to say gun carriers welcome here. They can do so and not face legal jeopardy just by wandering around doing their shopping.
Yes, Mark. When the right to keep and bear arms movement produced a lot of victories for the right to carry in many states, going from what were called may issue to shall issues. Mm. So when state authorities were required to issue permits to applicants who met a certain list of criteria rather than left it to the government officers' discretion, one of the things that some jurisdictions did was required large signage if they were going to prohibit gun carry. So, for instance, a shopping mall, if they wanted to prohibit the carry of guns, they would have to post on all entrance doors a signage of a certain square inches. For instance, only with the diabolical lawmakers in New York did they think to kind of flip it on its head. So people still may want to look out for signage indicating they're not welcome in New York, but they don't have to look for signs indicating that they're welcome to exercise their rights.
I believe you and I have discussed this before, Scott, but if you're talking about the big fancy shopping districts in New York, the windows there, that's prime real estate in terms of what signage goes up. And I would think that even just the displayment of signs would be onerous to some degree, wouldn't it?
Well, any imposition like that, I think, is onerous. But this is about how can they kind of establish a basis for trespass, and it's their private property, so they don't have to put the sign up. They only have to. And by the way, so right now we're not talking about New York because this is not a law in New York. This is a law in some other states, whereby if, for instance, let's just use the shopping mall example. It's easy to use. If the shopping mall wishes to be able to trespass people who have firearms or are in possession of firearms, they have to provide notice. Otherwise, it's not an offense against them, just like wearing the MAGA hat, for instance. And so the law has settled on that signage as a requirement for the notice. So I think it's not that great an imposition on the place, on the mall, for instance, in the hypothetical, if that's what they want to do, to bar people who are exercising their right to keep and bear arms.
Well, we'll be following this very, very closely as it bounces back and forth between the various courts over the next year or so.
Well, we can pause in the very close for at least a number of months, because the Second Circuit, I imagine, is not going to get to this until well into 2025.
And that's some freedom for New Yorkers there, which is always a good thing. Extra freedom. Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Cheers.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to take a moment to thank our guests on today's show, Tim Donner, Scott Cosenza, and John Parker of Sheepdog Impact Assistance. And of course, thank you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in each and every week. And I'd like to remind our listeners that Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.